I've achieved my aim, I've achieved my goal. What do I do now? One of the most important things about coaching is you don't tell or solutionize for somebody else. Actually, everybody has within them that level of awareness about what actually works for them and what doesn't. What stops you getting in the way of being the best version of yourself? Bringing that bar level up where you start to open that awareness. I wish I'd known that then. If somebody feels stuck, something will happen.
Hi EnvisionAirs, it's Nicole and Goodwyn here. Welcome to the EnvisionAir podcast. This is a podcast where we envision living our best lives by exploring everyday topics related to health, wealth, and community. On today's episode, we have Nick Goodwyn, a former Royal Air Force pilot turned executive, business, and performance coach. Nick has an impressive 41-year global career working in the aviation industry as both a military and civilian fast jet pilot, as well as a pilot examiner, consultant for the Ministry of Defense, as well as the Civil Aviation Authority. Nick has also been the secretary of a NATO Human Factors Working Group, secretary of the Royal Aeronautical Society's Flight Operations Group Committee, and has been master of the Honorable Company of Air Pilots, a City of London livery company. If those accolades weren't enough, which they are, he's also qualified as an executive and business coach, helping commercial pilots and other executives take care of their well-being, overcome limiting beliefs, and reach their fullest potential. Nick has a true commitment to self-development, which is clear not only with his esteemed career, but also his commitment to learning, as he also undertook study and obtained a postgraduate diploma in coaching psychology and was recently awarded a master's degree in executive and business coaching focused on pilot peer assistance and mental well-being. Wow. So it is a great honor to have Nick on the EnvisionAir podcast to talk to us about how we can find our passion, purpose, and performance using all of the knowledge, skills, and experience he has learned over the years. So, very warm welcome to Nick. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Nicole. And what a gorgeous day it is out there today, isn't it? It's really warm.
It's so warm.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. We're so lucky to have you. So why don't we just start with your background? Where are you from? Where did you grow up? And how was your childhood?
Okay, thank you. So I was born in Epsom in Surrey, a very, I think, in those days, typical early 5 or 6 years. My father, who'd been in the army for a short while, had joined Barclays Bank because his father had been there and his great-grandfather had been there. But what was really exciting is that my father, who commuted into London every day, at the age of 40, came home one day and said, "Do you know what? I'm not going to do that anymore. We have bought a pub and a restaurant in Surrey, in the sort of middle of the countryside, and we literally upped and left and he started a whole new career." So when I was about 6 or 7, my mum and dad moved to this pub in Surrey and started running that. And so I had a bit of an idyllic childhood from that point as well, because it was a beautiful village, beautiful countryside. And actually, it was one of those lovely things in life where it triggered what I ended up doing for the next, effectively all of my life in aviation, because one of our customers was a pilot from Gatwick. And when I was probably 10, maybe 11 years old, he took me one afternoon and he sat me in the front of his Boeing 707, and I had this wonderful sort of epiphany moment where I thought, this is actually what I want to do.
Wow.
I don't know how, I don't know what it looks like, but this is what I'm going to do. And it kind of triggered that really interesting, or the interest I've had for the rest of my life around aviation.
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh my gosh. And so what was that? Sorry, so you were just visiting, you were on site and you had this epiphany, just like being around the airplanes, or what was it exactly?
No, it was really very specific. One of our locals who came to our pub, he was a pilot, and he just took me to the office, the cockpit of the Boeing 707, and he sat me in his seat, and I just went, this is where I want to be. This is what I want to do. Yeah.
And did you maintain that relationship? Did he ever become a mentor?
I don't know who he is. It's
Really?
it's one of those little touch points in life where it'd be great to meet him maybe one day and just go thank you. If you had any idea what you did.
Yeah,
But, yeah,
definitely. I'm sure he would what an impact he had on your life, just that one
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And so that was the draw into aviation, but what was it that drew you into the Royal Air Force? Because that is in itself, quite an accomplishment.
Yeah. Do you know, I've asked myself that question for many years. My parents emigrated to France for a while. And I went to school in Epsom. I went to Epsom College. And there was... we had to be in the cadet units as part of that. And I joined the Air Cadets. And again, it opened some opportunities to me. So I think there's clearly a link there. My father and his father were in the military for a while. Interestingly, I know that I never, at that point, all I wanted to do was join the military to become a pilot. There was something about it which, again, as I was growing up and I became more and more involved in aeroplanes, and some of the mentors that I met who were so important to me, were people who tended to have been ex-military, ex-RAF pilots, and indeed, I think again when I was 16 or 17, a really fantastic man sat me in the front of his fighter jet at an air show, I think, and again I just sat there and just went, if I didn't know already, this is the direction I want to take. So
Oh, fantastic.
it grew over time for sure.
Yeah, but it feels like you're right. There were some touch points. It seems like whenever people invited you into their cockpit, those were the moments where it was like, aha, yes, I'm doing this.
I think that's very powerful, and I think that's what the power of people are when you meet individuals, and they can, in a moment, do something which even they probably don't realise will have any long-term impact, and it does have that powerful impact on people. And I know, again, as a kid, flying occasionally abroad. In those days, you could go up to the cockpit, and it was a really powerful moment again. And of course, we're not allowed to do that anymore in commercial aviation,
Right.
which is a real shame, because some of the work I've actually subsequently ended up doing is how do we energise individuals to believe and dream that they can actually do something like become a pilot.
Right.
And without those really wonderful touch points, without doubt, it's a bit harder than it used to be, because they made such a difference for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, it reminds me of someone who I follow. His name is Ed Milet, and he is a social media personality. He's an entrepreneur as well, and he talks about these moments being the moments where you touch your dream. And I think that's really powerful, because when you can touch your dream and make it a little bit more real, whether just that moment, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or a day doing something like that, it can be really powerful. So, yeah, interesting.
And I think with that is because you mentioned in the introduction about sort of limiting beliefs. And I know I experienced in some of my education, when I explained to people this is what I wanted to achieve. I remember one headmaster going, nobody from this school has ever achieved that, so what are you going to do? I.e.,
Wow.
why are you going to think about that? And actually that was a great spur for me, because the more people tell me something I can't do, the more I'm going to go out there and try and do it.
Is that right? That's amazing.
I think it is, actually, because, if you have a belief in something and a passion for something, I really genuinely believe that, you've got to give it a go, and if you can, and you achieve, it's
Yes.
wonderful. Isn't it?
Yeah, I'm 100% with you, but I feel like there's definitely been moments in my life where I have taken probably too much, I've given too much credence to someone else's opinion about myself, and something I've definitely overcome with work, but we can talk about that a bit later, because
Sure.
I'm very interested to hear your perspective on that. And so when you were a Royal Air Force pilot, how was that experience? I mean, it is for North American, I mean, most people probably know, but the Royal Air Force is such a huge accomplishment, not only to get into the program, but also to maintain such a long career. So how was that?
I think again, for me, I was very lucky that from sort of teenage years, I was very fortunate to get involved in the vintage aeroplane and the airshow business, working for companies that built old aeroplanes for TVs, films, and then flew them at airshows. So I was absolutely immersed in aviation, and I, during that period, was lucky to get a scholarship from the RAF to fly gliders, which I did when I was literally 16 years old and a day. And then 2 years later, the Royal Air Force gave me a scholarship to get my private pilot's license. So there was a bit of a development program, which again, I think really helped build all of the, just built my passion, if I'm going to be honest. It just made me more and more determined to try and chase that. And then very shortly after my mother passed away, which was probably one thing that sort of triggered that, right, now I'm going to pursue my career. So I applied, and I was very lucky to get a place at the Officer Training College. So all pilots and all navigators at that point and flight crew in the RAF have to become officers first before you train as a pilot.
Right.
So very lucky. It's a very, very competitive process. The reality is, and I'm sure it's the same today as it was then, thousands of people apply. And I was just very, very fortunate to be successful in the whole selection process.
Wow.
So when I was in March 1988, I arrived at the Royal Air Force College, Cranwell, to do my officer training, and then subsequently into flying training for the next 2 to 3 years.
Wow.
It's a very tough experience. And you learn an awful lot about yourself. You learn about how to be with other people. Understandably, there's a lot about leadership, a lot about teamwork, a lot of emphasis on sort of being physically fit. And interestingly, at that point, the one thing I don't think there was about mental fitness and mental health and well-being. I think it was the end of a generation's that sort of thing just didn't really come to the fore. And actually, especially when I went through flying training and was successful and passed my flying training and was awarded my wings, which you get on your chest, which is kind of like the proudest day of your life at that point.
Amazing.
I've actually talked subsequently in a lot of the work that I now do to say, in fact, one of the presentations I did was always called, I wish I'd known that then, what I know now about mental resilience and building your cognitive skill sets.
Yes.
Because I think I would have been a better version of myself then than I probably was. But it was a long process, very exciting, very demanding. Again, of the 15 people who started my training course, I think only 3 of us ended up flying the fast jets, and only a few of the others ended up flying different types of aeroplane. So the washout rate, I think you call it, or the chop rate as we used to call it, was very significant. So
that's
again,
incredible.
I feel very blessed that I sort of made it all the way through that process.
Wow, so it's thousands of applicants, 15 people get selected, and 3. Is that right?
So that was on my flying training course.
I see.
So the sort of amount that actually gets selected. So my officer course, training course, had about 150 on it, and they used to run that 4 times a year. I think, I can't remember.
Right.
But even so, the selection process is very rigorous.
That is that's incredible. I mean, you should be so proud. And again, to have such a long career, amazing. And so one of the questions I was thinking was there a moment in your career? Obviously, you mentioned the fact that you were lacking maybe, or the program was lacking from like a mental health welfare perspective. But was there a specific moment during your career as an RAF pilot that you feel has really stuck with you, and you go back to that and you've taken that into your coaching career now, because now you are helping a lot of pilots that could be facing different obstacles? So I guess the question is there something, a struggle, let's say, or a moment of revelation when you were an RAF pilot that you now bring as like a touch point when you're helping pilots now?
I think there are maybe 2 or 3, if I may, and I'll briefly go through them.
Oh,
the
tell
first
us.
one actually relates to something I mentioned, which is when you get your wings, you qualify as a pilot. Actually, that's not the end of the journey. Actually, if you like, the moment where I achieved my ambition is where I became what's called combat ready on a frontline fast jet. I flew the Tornado fighter bomber squadron, which means you can go and operate and do air operations around the world, and that's a hugely proud moment. I mean, that's the end. That's a massive moment in time. And actually, I realised the next day or the day after was one of the worst days of my life. And what I mean by that is very simple. Not only did I might just have had a slight headache from perhaps the celebrations of becoming combat ready, but actually it was, I've achieved my aim. I've achieved my goal. What do I do now? And at that point, I had no mechanisms to know what to do with that. And a lot of what we do and what I do now is actually saying, when you're setting aims, if you have a passion for something and it gives you a purpose, you want to perform to achieve that, for example, and we maybe talk a bit more about that in later. But, what do you do when you've actually achieved that aim? Or, and how do you build? So there was a lot about sort of setting objectives, if you like, goal setting, which I didn't know at that point. And that took me quite a long time after that point to work that through. And then go, right, what's the next thing I want to achieve, and what's the next thing after that? And actually, it actually led to quite a bit of a dip in kind of, oh gosh, that's, what do I do next? So there's that really key moment for me.
That's great.
I think the next key moment, and actually I love this, there was some lovely research done by Trinity College Dublin just around 2020-21, just as we were coming into the pandemic. And this is a study of about 2,000 commercial air pilots. And they said that after that extensive research, they came to realise that after all, pilots are just human beings. And so this is the second point for me, which is when especially in the military, I didn't just put on a uniform. The uniform was a defensive mechanism for who I was as a person. I became and I behaved how I was expected to behave within that environment and with the job that I had to do. And then I might go home at the end of the day or at the weekend, and that wasn't necessarily me. And that created, again, a really, over a period of time, a real sort of, I don't know why I feel that that's a problem. Oh, it's not a problem, but it's just inside, it's a challenge. It took me, again, a lot of work to come to realise that actually, in some of these jobs that we do, not just aviation, we become a person in our work environment, or maybe outside of our safe, where we just are who we are. And that's okay. But sometimes you go, gosh, but it's not really me. So there was a period of my time where I realised then that I had to learn a little bit more about myself. And I think this is where the sort of generated this curiosity to learn more about myself, learn more about how I am with other people and how other people are. And a lot of the coaching I've done in aviation for pilots is often about, okay, but you're only human, and what gets in the way of you doing your really high performing task, your job? What are those interferences that are just what we all experience in life? And how do you mitigate against those? How do you become resilient about those?
Yes. So
I think that was one other key moment. And then the third moment is I went through a very low period where lots of things happened in my life. Again, life events, both had a physical impact through an accident and emotional impact through a divorce and various other bits and pieces. And again, went through some fantastic learning to understand about myself. And I think if you put all of those together, it created an awareness in me that actually I really, really, really got engaged working with other people around what I went through, but not my experience is my experience. Everybody else's is different. But actually supporting people to become more aware of themselves, and therefore, if you like, to be the best version of themselves, was really, really exciting. And I just found it really energizing, and it's a huge privilege to do that sort of work.
That's amazing. I love that. The third example is almost like that, turning challenges into opportunities. You were going through some really difficult periods in your life, and instead of, let's say, falling to like the victim mindset, which we all do sometimes, you really took that opportunity to learn, grow, and now you're like paying it forward in a way and helping others to overcome similar issues. And that's really, really a great thing to do.
Thank you. And again, it's interesting that so often in life there are people you meet, or there's a set of circumstances. This all happened at a time where in my military job, we were actually recognising that we needed to do far more work on understanding how we think, how we are, how we interact with the world, which is something we hadn't naturally looked at. And I was actually in a position at that point to be doing a lot of that work. And in the RAF, we instigated a program which was called Aircrew Performance Coaching, where we elected to train a select few people who would then work one-on-one with our elite pilots to maximise their cognitive capacity, the way they were, the ability to do their job the best they could do. And I was hugely privileged to find myself being selected to be one of those first people to be trained as an aircrew performance coach. And then I ended up running that programme. So again, I just found myself at a time and a place where not did only my own desire to learn more and to impart that back to people, but the opportunity arose as well.
Wow, fantastic. That's so great. Well, Nick, I'd love to talk a bit more. Let's delve into the coaching aspect, because I think the idea of passion, purpose, and performance is something that I think listeners really would get a lot of value from. And so we had a life coach come on the podcast and explain how life coaching can be very powerful and help us overcome certain, beliefs, including automated negative thoughts, which you referred to as ants, which is a good way to remember them. But would you say executive and business coaching has a similar approach, or is there a different focus in general, or is it quite similar but different?
That's a really great question, and I think if you're referring to the person who was on the podcast before, I have no doubt that person found that particular area around coaching, around life coaching, is the thing that really, enlightened them and obviously enables them to support other people. Whilst all of my qualifications, or many of my qualifications, are around sort of executive and business coaching, funnily enough, they've always been centred more around the work I've done, so often with pilots in aviation. But I've worked quite extensively in with business and in the city as well. A lot of it is around, as I said, sort of the very human element and sort of the, if you like, the sort of what stops you getting in the way of being the best version of yourself. And you refer to passion, purpose, performance, which a wonderful friend and colleague, Jackie Smith, and myself sort of created. And I'll talk a bit where that comes from, because I think it will relate well. We were doing a lot of work on, so the underpinning of all of it is psychodynamics, which, gosh, it sounds a big word, doesn't it? What does that mean? It actually sort of lends itself from some sort of theories of people like Carl Jung, for example, who was a disciple, if you like. Freud was the original psychoanalyst. Jung studied under Freud, but actually decided to go in a different direction about what were the importance of the work, and it was more about being. So we lent ourselves from that school of psychodynamics, and into that, Jackie and I got really curious about some work that was around Martin Heidegger. And Martin Heidegger had this concept of having owned life, unowned life, and disowned life, and that you might float between the three. Now, we looked at that and we realised that we'd spoken to a lot of people, often who were really successful or had achieved what they were out to do in life. So a lot of these people had set out with a purpose of what they wanted to do. And so often, because of that, they had this passion. So for me, my passion was aviation. My purpose was to become a pilot. And if you can do that, your performance will allow you to achieve what you want to achieve. So the three work in harmony. Mm-hmm. And this lends itself back to some of that sort of psychology that we looked at. But what's really interesting is how many people do we know who sit there going, well, I got this job that I wanted, and, I now lead the team that I wanted to be, or I'm a director or a leader or a manager or whatever. But sometimes when I sit in my own space at night, I go, what's wrong? There's something not right. And we found that when you explain around these three areas, purpose, passion, performance, you'll start to talk to them and you go, oh yeah, do you know what? I lost my passion. I used to really want to do this, and somewhere it's gone missing. Or, I had this purpose, and now, as I said with me, I achieved my purpose. What do I do now? Where's my next day? Where's my next step? And that can impact on your performance. So we worked on this idea that actually if you use coaching, and you explore those three areas, for example, you may develop an awareness in the individual to go, oh yeah, do you know what it is? I've lost my passion, or, I kind of found my purpose has gone mislaid. And you may be able to enable that person, to empower that person to capture back that passion, maybe that purpose, and therefore regain that performance. And that's the concept of a lot of the work I do now. And it fits so well with the mental health and well-being work I do with commercial pilots and others. And it's about looking at oneself. So, your question was actually about, is that life coaching? Is it executive business coaching? I think it blends across them, if I may. I don't. I realise that my qualifications label me, but I'm not sure my work labels me.
No, but I like that, because I was actually also going to ask about the specific program, the Passion, Purpose and Performance program that I know you do a lot of work with. What I'd love to, you explained kind of how they work synergetically. What are some strategies that people can use in each of those 3 quadrants or 3 circles, essentially?
When we used to do a lot of work with military pilots, and what I do now, some of the skills that I was sort of upskilled with focused on a blend of things like sports psychology, business psychology, etc., etc. And there was some really lovely, and people will know and recognise some of these areas. So, for example, a guy called Dr. Terry Orlick's. And Terry Orlick's developed this idea of a circle of excellence, a wheel of excellence. And this was used specifically in sports psychology. And it looked at some key areas, if you like. And I'm just going to refer down to something in front of me, so bear with me. So his wheel of excellence had this idea of blending a balance of self-confidence, of how to focus, how to fully focus, how to build mental readiness, and with that comes mental resilience, how to limit distractions. And distractions, by the way, I love could be, something you mentioned earlier on, internal and external. We all know about external distractions. The internal distractions can often be our own limiting self-beliefs, our own negative inner voice, our imposter syndrome, which I've worked a lot with because something I probably have suffered from in the past quite often. If you work in those areas, for example, and Dr. Terry Orlick's used to have full focus as his sort of central core point. We found that for people that we were working with, sort of high performing individuals, but more in a broader role rather than say just a sports role, then having belief and commitment, all of these built into belief and commitment. So when you're working with somebody, you can kind of explore each of those little areas and see which one might be where there may be can be added more of to do more around. And to build into, therefore, that central thing about belief and commitment. So the outside is kind of like generating passion and building into a purpose. The other thing we looked at, which again is really wonderful because it lends itself so well, by the way, to the aviation piece, is Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. Now, these are all very, very well established programs or books. What we did was go, do you know what? The lovely thing about 7 Habits is going from being very dependent to independent to interdependent. Now, the context for a pilot is great. When you start off as being a pilot, you're wholly dependent on your instructor and everybody around you because you don't know how to fly, But you learn and you become independent. You can actually fly the aeroplane. You can actually operate the aeroplane and do a bit more. And then in many careers, and myself is one, you go to that level of interdependence where you can give back. You can become the flying instructor, you can become the coach, you can become the mentor, and you can give back your own experiences. So, I mean, I don't wholly focus on things like Stephen Covey and Terry Orlick's, but there's some of the areas that you can utilise when you're working one-on-one with an individual and explore some of those avenues and go, well, what works for you? Mm-hmm. And I, we can go beyond that. And we had some other things like, for example, we do a lot in flying, which is around how do you make good decisions, and what do you need to make good decisions? You need to be able to communicate, you need to have good self-awareness, awareness of others, about what resources are available to you. And in flying, we utilise decision action loops. It's a process where you kind of analyse how to make great decisions. Mm-hmm. And again, I found that using those processes in the scenarios of working with individuals just enables people to just take a step away and go, oh yeah, I've never really thought about how do I really decide what I want to do? And if you then blend that back into how you're performing, where's your purpose, where's your passion, the three then come together. So passion, purpose, performance is great. It sits behind sort of the concept of people like Martin Heidegger And then there's these lovely areas that you can work on and find what works for the individual. So for me personally, it's exploring what works best for the individual I'm working with, rather than giving them something that I think is a great idea or whatever like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so fascinating. I mean, obviously, I was writing down some notes because I thought it was super interesting. Belief and commitment seems to be almost like the heart of it all, right? Is that correct? Like belief and commitment is essentially the starting point. And then you can kind of build out from there. Is that correct? Would you say
it is? Because what's really interesting when you work with people so often, where they've lost something around their passion and purpose, is because they found themselves in positions where something is actually challenging their inner belief system. And it can be, for example, you're working for a company and the company may take a direction in what it wants to do, which may maybe come up against your own inner belief system. And then it creates that challenge of, well, what do I do? Do I have a voice here? Do I actually call that voice and say, I'm not sure I can? And sometimes with people and I've ended up coaching people where they have to take a career step change because it's just, they're now not the fit for whatever has happened in their professional career or whatever. Either that's moved on, or perhaps most importantly, they've grown as people, and grown beyond that profession, that experience or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that could also be applied not only in the workplace, but in relationships, potentially, friendships, and that lasting belief is, I think that's really sad when people carry the lasting beliefs the beliefs that were created in those experiences that might have been negative, and then they carry that forward in their life, and it becomes like the foundation or the bedrock for future relationships or future work relationships as well. So it's great that you can help them to rethink those and reframe. If we had a listener who was feeling a bit stuck and they weren't able to even identify their passion or purpose, maybe they have the imposter syndrome where they think they don't have the right qualifications, or maybe they think they're too old to start or too young to start. How can we help them today to start like brainstorming or putting some strategies in place just to even start identifying passion and purpose?
I think for me, what came to my mind when you were asking that question, which I think is a really powerful question, and again, I often find that I think for people that I sit with, first of all, is actually just sitting with somebody and listening. I think so often people feel stuck because they sometimes just don't feel they've been listened to. And I think one of the really powerful things about coaching, for example, and I think coaching across its domains, and I have quite strong sense of one of the most important things about coaching is you don't tell or solutionize for somebody else. Actually, everybody has within them that level of awareness about what actually works for them and what doesn't. And that actually, I think for me, really comes back from Carl Jung. I've actually got a great quote that Carl Jung had, which kind of adapted to coaching works really well. So the first thing is actually, for me, is actually allow somebody the respect and the opportunity and the time to be listened to. And coaching, I think, is about asking questions because, again, in my sense is, if people have the answers themselves, what it may be is that it's lying slightly within their unconscious or their subconscious. And it might be unconscious for reasons, and those reasons might be painful to them. And that's why, as a human defense mechanism, they sit in our unconscious rather than our conscious thoughts. But coaching is about maybe bringing that bar level up, where you start to open that awareness. And importantly is, if it is difficult for that or challenging for the individual, that's what you're there to do. You hold them, you support them in that challenging space, and you are there with them and you walk with them. And just through maybe some interesting, just being curious about somebody and excited about what somebody else is and how they bring whoever they are, I found in my experience that if somebody feels stuck, something will happen. There'll be that beginning of flow, and then once that starts to happen, it's up to the individual where they go with that, and that's the exciting journey. that you go with. And it's such a privilege. It's so humbling when you're going with somebody and they are just beginning to explore, and you know, they will tell you what is their passion and purpose. It maybe just needs a little bit of unsticking.
Wow. I mean, honestly, Nick, like the way you just spoke about that, it was so beautiful. It really it was really touching, actually, because I think it's always just about sometimes that human connection that people need, and being listened to, and having that space that you give people that to explore and just be heard, I think is so powerful. And really, really touching. So I'm just so glad that you have people like, you are doing this sort of work to help people to get unstuck. So
and the context of some of the people I work with, you can imagine, because of the nature of the jobs they do, it's very hard for them to talk to people. I mean, if you take pilots, statistically, and in fact, a lot of the work I do around health and well-being for pilots has been created from a very simple premise, which is pilots don't really talk to anybody about what goes on inside. They have these great outward defence mechanisms, but they will talk to somebody like a peer, like somebody who's got that lived experience with them. But I think it goes broader than that.
No, absolutely. I mean, yeah, definitely. But the fact that you create that space for them is amazing. And so thank you so much for sharing that. I think we're ready to move on to the final part of the EnvisionAir podcast. And this is the EnvisionAir questionnaire, which is a fun feature of the podcast. We ask guests to explore and reflect on their past, present, and future. So we have 3 questions. And I'm going to start with the first one, which is looking backwards, so looking at your past. If you could give your 15-year-old self any advice, what would it be and why? Now, I know you did allude to it earlier in our conversation about, mental health, but I don't know if I'm going to let you answer that. What would your advice be to your 15-year-old self?
Wow, that's a great question. And the reason why I'm just reflecting on that is because it is so pertinent to work I've been doing with myself only in the last few months. And I will take a choice to share something which is quite personal, because actually it will respect the question you've asked.
Thank you.
I had a real tough time at school, and I never understood why. And in the last year or so, because of some learning through what's going on for somebody very close to me, I learned that one of my offspring has very mild neurodiversity. They are going to be high functioning, but probably have a little element of neurodiversity. And when we discovered this, the lovely lady who I was talking to about this, the doctor, sort of went, "Oh, by the way, when are we going to talk about you?" And it was this magic moment in my life, another touch point with an individual, where I suddenly went, "Oh, yeah, that kind of makes sense." So what would I say to my 15-year-old self now? I'd go, "Do you know what? You're having a tough time and you see the world very slightly differently, but that's because it's okay, and you will achieve. You will achieve what you're setting out to achieve, but sometimes it's going to be really tough. And you won't know why till you're about much later on in your life why it is." So that's what I'd tell my 15-year-old self.
That is so beautiful. Almost, it makes me tear up a little bit, because in a beautiful way, because I think when we're young and we're struggling with things and we just don't have the knowledge or exposure, and
the environment was different then.
Yeah,
nobody would talk about what I think people talk about now in terms of health, well-being, understanding that we're all different.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're lucky nowadays. We're talking about everything, and I think that's great, so thank you. And if you were now thinking about the present, if there was anyone in the world you could seek advice from or sit down and have lunch with, who would it be and why?
Wow, another fantastic question. There's one person just comes to mind, and I will share this with you. So I am friends with this person. I do know this person. He's 102 years old.
Wow.
He was a Mosquito bomber pilot in the Second World War for the Royal Air Force. Next Thursday, he is abseiling down the Royal London Hospital on behalf of the London's Air Ambulance charity, of which actually I'm a trustee, because we're having to raise a lot of money called Up Against Time. He is the most outstanding human being. You would never believe he's anything more than about, I don't know, my age. And he's going to be the oldest person ever to abseil, I believe, if he, I know him, he'll be successful. He inspires me every time I think about him. See, it's just made me smile just thinking about. His name is Colin Bell, Flight Lieutenant Colin Bell. I have had lunch with him or dinner with him before, and I always walk away humbled in the presence of greatness.
Oh, wow. That is incredible. Oh, my gosh. 102. And he's doing abseiling. That's incredible. Wow. Okay. Well, very good. Very good. Thank you for sharing that. That's really cool. Right. Now, looking forward, in your future, what's one goal that you hope to achieve in 5 years that you're willing to share with us?
Again, it's something I learned actually. So as a coach, I sometimes get coaching and I get supervision. And I was working with a coach a few weeks ago, and we had one of those magic moments where you learn something, which is I set myself things to do in life and I strive to achieve them. And often I get diverted on the way. And they tend to be some interesting experiences, some things I would never do again. Work-wise, there's things you go, okay, I'm no good at that, but I gave it a go. And other things you go, wow, I really got energized by that, and I'll do more of that. And I always thought that for me, it was about achieving a goal that I set in the future, and that's really important. But what I learned just recently was actually just to enjoy where life takes you. So my goal that I've set myself in 5 years' time is to enjoy the journey still. And just go with wherever it takes you, which is probably one of the reasons why I was excited to do this, because it made me nervous and excited, and I thought, I have no idea what this will be like. It's been a pleasure, by the way,
Good.
and I've really enjoyed doing it.
I'm so
glad.
glad.
I've had an experience, which is fantastic.
Well, you're always welcome to come on whenever you want, and we're so honored to have you. So I really want to thank you again, Nick, for joining the EnvisionAir podcast. Now you're part of the family, the EnvisionAir family. And so thank you for sharing your story, which is super inspiring, all the lessons you learned, and also about passion, purpose, and performance. And so for anyone who's listening who would like to learn more, I will put all of Nick's information in the show notes, how you can contact him, and any websites. And we just want to again say thank you so much for being on the EnvisionAir podcast, Nick.
I don't have a website, but by all means, people, please contact me if you like. Be always willing to chat. And thank you, Nicole.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you. Okay. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure you hit subscribe and check out this video here.